Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening based on your current location. Welcome to today's video. I hope you all are healthy. In today's video, I am going to cover AWS data transfer charges. I will discuss all the architectural use cases where you need data transfer and what are the data transfer charges associated for the use cases. If you are taking AWS Solution Architect Associate or Professional certifications, then this is a very important topic for the exam. On the other hand, if you are a solution architect or cloud engineer and building your application architecture or working for a disaster recovery solution, then data transfer charge is one of the important aspects you should consider. I have created this video with diagrams, animations and illustrations to explain some complex use cases in easy understandable format. If you follow today's session without skipping any content, you should have a strong foundational knowledge on AWS data transfer concept and charges. Before I start, I would like to request you, if you are new to our channel or haven't subscribed yet, then please subscribe to our channel and please click on the bell icon to get notification for any new topics. Our goal is to help everyone with premium content like this without any paid subscription, and your support will motivate us. Now let's review the high level topics for today's session. We will start with data transfer to or from internet. Then we'll review data transfer between AWS services, followed by data transfer between different availability zones, and then data transfer within AWS regions, then data transfer between AWS regions, and then if you have a hybrid use case where you are using on-premise data centers and AWS Cloud simultaneously, then what is the data transfer if you are using a VPN solution? Or what is the data transfer if you are using a direct connect solution? I hope these are all the use cases that we come across day by day in our architectural design decisions. And this topic will give you a complete understanding about AWS data transfer charges. If you feel I have skipped any topic or any use case where data transfer is not covered in these topics, please let me know your comment. I will create a separate video to cover that use case. Now let's start with our first use case, data transfer to or from internet. In this use case, let's try to understand what is ingress traffic and what is egress traffic and what are the charges associated with ingress versus egress. To start with ingress traffic, when traffic is originating from internet and data is coming to AWS Cloud. That means you could have other cloud provider, you could have external data sources, or you could have on-premise data sources, and you are bringing the traffic or you are bringing the data to AWS Cloud using internet. This traffic or this data transfer is called ingress data transfer. If you are generating the data inside AWS Cloud, maybe you are storing the data in a S3 bucket, or maybe you are creating the data in EC2 instance and you are transferring the data out of AWS Cloud to internet. It could be you can take it to your on-premise data center or you can take it to other cloud provider. This traffic or this path is called egress traffic. Now, what are the charges? There are no charge for inbound data transfer across all services in all regions. If you are taking data into AWS Cloud, AWS will not charge you a single cent. But the returning egress traffic is chargeable and charges between 8 cent to 12 cent in US dollar per GB of data. Egress data transfer charges is tier based and the price varies on the amount of data or volume of data you are transferring from AWS to other cloud provider or to your data center. One more point I would like to highlight here. These data transfer charges is not uniform across regions. Egress data transfer charges varies region to region. Next, let's try to understand data transfer between AWS services. For this use case, let's consider that we have one VPC. Inside VPC, we have a public subnet and we have a EC2 instance in that public subnet. We are trying to communicate with AWS services using public endpoints. Maybe you are trying to access data from Amazon S3, Amazon DynamoDB, SQS, or SNS. Now let's understand what would be the data transfer charges in this use case. One point I'd like to highlight, your EC2 instance in public subnet and you are trying to connect AWS services public endpoints. In this case, the data transfer charges will be free. Since you are using public endpoints and using the internet gateway, there will be no data transfer charges. Now let's consider a different use case. In this use case, your EC2 instance is inside a private subnet. In previous example, the EC2 was in public subnet. Now in this example, EC2 in private subnet. And you have a NAT gateway to communicate with internet. In this use case, you are communicating with Amazon S3, Amazon DynamoDB, SQS or SNS using a NAT gateway. Now let's understand how the charges will be. As you know, the data between EC2 instance and NAT, for this data transfer, you have to pay for the NAT charges or the NAT device charges. But the data transfer between NAT gateway and AWS services public endpoint using the internet gateway is free. But you have to pay for the data processing charge of the NAT gateway. And as you know, NAT gateway charge per hour basis for the service charge and data processing charge based on per GB of data you are transferring or you are downloading. Next, let's understand how the data transfer charges work between availability zones. I hope this is a very familiar architecture diagram to you. We have created a high available architecture and spanning our EC2 workload across availability zones. We have a RDS multi-AG database where we have the primary database in one availability zone and the standby database in a different availability zone. Now let's try to understand the data transfer between the availability zone. First, let's say the EC2 instance when it is trying to communicate to the RDS primary instance, and if it is in the same availability zone, then you are not paying any data transfer charge. Data transfer within the same availability zone is free, but when you transfer data between availability zones, you will pay for both ingress and egress traffic. Let's understand the concept using this high available architecture. Now maybe your EC2 instance in the availability zone 2 is trying to communicate with the RDS primary node in availability zone 1. In that case, you are paying both ingress and egress charges. Now if your EC2 instance from availability zone 1 will try to communicate or send data to availability zone 2, in that case also, since you are sending data across availability zones, you are paying ingress and egress charges. Now what about the RDS multi-AZ database? RDS synchronize the data between primary node and secondary node. Although both the nodes are in different availability zone and RDS is transferring data across availability zone, then also you are not paying any ingress or egress data charges for this use case or for this synchronization. That is part of the RDS feature. To summarize, for inter-availability zone data transfer, you are paying both for ingress and egress traffic, and the data transfer charges is 1 cent per GB of data transfer. Now let's try to understand a different use case, the data transfer between availability zone. Let's say we have three VPCs, VPC-A, VPC-B and VPC-C. Now VPC-A and VPC-B both are in one availability zone or availability zone 1, but VPC-C in availability zone 2. And we have created VPC peering connection between VPC-A and VPC-B and between VPC-A and VPC-C. Now let's try to understand what will be the data transfer charges when you are trying to communicate between different services in these VPCs. Any traffic between VPC-A and VPC-B, there will be no data transfer charge because both VPC-A and VPC-B are in same availability zone. Now, if you want to transfer data between services from VPC-A to VPC-C, in that case, you are paying both ingress and egress data transfer charges. Since VPC-A and VPC-C are in different availability zone, you are doing a cross availability zone data transfer. That is why you are paying both ingress and egress charges. For this use case also, you are paying 1 cent per GB of data you are transferring for both egress and ingress data transfer. Let's understand some use cases where we need data transfer within AWS region. In previous example, we connected those VPCs using VPC peering and we saw how the charges will be. In this example, let's assume we have a transit gateway in the picture, and using transit gateway, we are peering the VPCs inside one region, but the VPCs are in different availability zones. As you know, AWS Transit Gateway will allow you to create a hub and spoke model to integrate your VPCs. Now let's understand what would be the charges for this use case. Since you are using AWS Transit Gateway will charge you per GB of data transfer. That is Transit Gateway data processing charges. In this case, using this Transit Gateway, we have connected VPC-A and VPC-B in same availability zone and VPC-A and VPC-C which are in different availability zone but within one region, because Transit Gateway is a regional resource. Transit Gateway will also charge you based on per VPC attachment, and that charge is per hour service charge per attachment. In this example, we have three VPCs. That means we have three attachment to the Transit Gateway. And in that case, you are going to pay for three attachments and per hour service charges per attachment. To summarize, if you are using Transit Gateway, you are going to pay two different charges. This is not data transfer charge, but this charge is Transit Gateway data processing charge and Transit Gateway attachment charge. Now let's review a classical web application hosting use case. Let's consider you have a cloud front, and using the CloudFront distribution, you are distributing your web applications around the world. Maybe you have a S3 bucket which is hosting the static content, and you are serving the dynamic content from an application load balancer. Now let's try to understand what will be the charges for this use case. First, there will be no data transfer charges when CloudFront will try to fetch data from the origins. In this example, we have two origins, S3 bucket for static content and application load balancer for dynamic content. Now, what about the charges for egress? Whenever there will be a data transfer from your CloudFront to internet, then you are going to pay egress data transfer charge. For this use case, any ingress traffic from internet to your CloudFront will be free, We discussed this at the beginning of this video, and you are only going to pay for the egress traffic. That means any data that will be propagated from your cloud front to the internet, and the charges will be 2 cents per GB of data transfer. Please remember, these charges are for AWS regions in United States and in Canada. Next, let's try to understand the data transfer between AWS regions. Let's assume you have a web application. You are hosting that web application using a EC2 instance, and that web application is in UST2 region. But you are trying to access AWS service public APIs from a different region. Maybe you have a S3 bucket, maybe you have a DynamoDB, maybe you have a SQSQ or a SNS topic in UST1 region, and you are trying to invoke those public APIs from a different region. In this example, we are trying to invoke from UST2 region. And now let's understand what will be the data transfer charges. Since you are communicating or you are propagating data between two different regions, you have to pay cross-region data transfer charges. When it comes to cross-region data transfer, ingress data transfer is free, but you are going to pay for egress data transfer, and egress charges will be 2 cents per GB of data you will transfer. If you compare for inter-availability zone data transfer, in that case you are paying for both ingress and egress traffic. But for inter-region data transfer, you are only paying for egress traffic, and the egress traffic charges are 2 cents per GB of data transfer. Again, let me remind you, this pricing is for AWS regions in United States and in Canada. Let's see a different use case. Now let's try to understand the VPC peering using transit gateway. If you remember our previous example, we had 3 VPCs and we peer using VPC peerings. Now if you are using AWS Transit Gateway, since Transit Gateway is a regional resource, we need Transit Gateway per region. For this diagram, I have used one Transit Gateway to peer VPC A and VPC B. And then I have used another one transit gateway, and I have created transit gateway peering between the region, and this architecture diagram will give you a hub and spoke model and communication between VPC A, VPC B and VPC C. Now let's try to understand the data transfer charges for this use case. Now when you are trying to send data between two regions using the transit gateway, you are going to pay cross-region data transfer. Ingress traffic is free, but you are going to pay for egress data transfer, and egress charges will be 2 cents per GB of data you will transfer. As you know, AWS Transit Gateway charges per GB of data processing. For this architectural diagram, we have used 2 transit gateways, and we will pay the data processing charges 2 times. Next, AWS Transit Gateway also charges for per hour of services per attachment. How many transit gateway attachment do you think we have for this diagram? If you want to find the answer, you can pause the video and count the number of transit gateway attachments and then match the count with me. For this architecture diagram, we have total 5 transit gateway attachments. I know your count is also 5, but in case if your count is not 5, then let's review what are the 5 attachments. Here you go. Every dot represents a transit gateway attachment. To summarize, we are paying cross-region data transfer charges. We will pay per GB data processing charges for 2 transit gateways, and per hour service charges per attachment for 5 transit gateway attachments. Now let's try to understand the data transfer charges when you are transferring data over VPN. Let's assume that you have a hybrid cloud environment. You have some workload in your corporate data center and you have some workload running parallelly in AWS Cloud, and you have connected your corporate data center with AWS Cloud using a site-to-site VPN or AWS site-to-site VPN. Now, what will be the data transfer charges for this architectural configuration? To transfer data between your data center and AWS Cloud, here the data transfer out charges will be applied. If you remember at the beginning of the video or at the first architectural slide, we saw that any ingress data transfer is free, but AWS will charge you for the egress data transfer. Now, any data or any traffic from your corporate data center to AWS Cloud is free. But if you are trying to move out any data from AWS Cloud to your data center over the VPN, in that case, you will be charged for the data transfer out. And the charges will be, as I mentioned, ingress traffic is free, but egress traffic will be charged 2 cents per GB of data transfer. Since you are using site-to-site VPN, you have to remember that site-to-site VPN has per hour service charges. Now there are two charges it will be applied: data transfer out charges, on top of that site-to-site VPN per hour service charges. Now if you have more than one VPN, in that case you are paying the per hour service charges for number of VPN you are going to create. But data transfer out charges, it will be cumulated across your VPN connections. Next, let's review data transfer over direct connect. So if I compare my previous architecture diagram with this, we have the same hybrid cloud architecture. We have a corporate data center. We have some workload running in the corporate data center, and parallelly we have some workload in AWS Cloud. Now, instead of a VPN connection, we have integrated corporate data center using AWS Cloud with a direct connect connection. Now, let's understand what will be the data transfer charges when you are using a direct connect connection. Like previous, any data transfer from your corporate data center to AWS Cloud, that is the ingress data transfer, is free. But if you are moving out any data from AWS Cloud to your data center using direct connect, you will pay data transfer out charges. And here the pricing is again same. For ingress it is free, for egress 2 cents per GB of data transfer. Similar to our previous diagram, like VPN connection, if you are creating a direct connect, you have to pay per hour service charges for the direct connect connection. Per hour service charges will be charged based on the number of connections you have. If you have more than one direct connect connection, then the charges will be per direct connect connection. Now if I'll summarize, let's say you have two direct connect connection. In that case, you will pay per hour service charges per direct connect connection, and you will pay data transfer out charges cumulative over the direct connect connections. To remind you, ingress traffic is free and egress traffic is 2 cents per GB of data transfer. And all the pricings, whatever we have discussed throughout this video, is based on AWS regions in United States and in Canada. Now we came to a conclusion about today's topic. I hope I was able to clarify all your doubts. If you have any question regarding today's topic, please post your question as comment to this video. We will answer at earliest. Before we conclude today, I would like to request you please subscribe our channel and please click on the bell icon to get notification for new topics. If you want me to cover any topics, please provide your request as a comment on this video. If you appreciate our effort, please like this video. It will definitely motivate us. At the end, thank you. Please take care and stay safe.